My father stopped texting back after I sent the report. By the time I landed in Calgary the next morning, my locker at the firm had already been cleared out, and my mother left one voicemail: "Please tell me you didn't actually send it to the board." I am Audrey, 26, a forensic auditor at a mid-sized accounting firm in Calgary. 2 nights before I flew home for my parents' anniversary dinner, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and 3 glasses of wine in me, going through the financial statements of my family's company, a chain of premium home renovation and design studios my parents had built from a single storefront in Mississauga into 11 locations across Ontario and Alberta. I wasn't supposed to have access to those files anymore. I'd been quietly phased out of the business 2 years earlier, right around the time my older brother's wife, Larissa, was made chief operating officer. Larissa was the golden child by marriage. She'd come from old Rosedale money, the kind of family with a name on a hospital wing, and when my brother Caleb brought her home the first Christmas, my mother actually cried at the table. Not happy tears at first, more like relief, like she'd finally been handed proof that we belonged somewhere. Larissa was polished in a way our family had never quite managed despite the money. She knew which fork to use, she said summer house instead of cottage, and she had this habit of touching your forearm when she spoke to you like she was comforting a child. My parents adored her instantly and completely, and they made it clear in ways both spoken and unspoken that Larissa's comfort came before mine. I'd always been the difficult one. The one who asked too many questions at dinner, who corrected my father's math under my breath, who didn't smile for the family Christmas card unless someone actually told a joke. I went into accounting because numbers didn't lie to me the way people did. I was good at my job, methodical, careful, the kind of person clients requested by name because I caught things other auditors missed. My parents found this mildly embarrassing. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" my mother used to say, not unkindly, just tired, like I was a software glitch she'd given up trying to fix. The trouble started the way it usually does, quietly, in a place nobody was looking. I still had remote access to an old shared drive from when I used to help with quarterly filings, a leftover permission nobody had bothered to revoke. Out of habit more than suspicion, I opened the latest financials one slow Tuesday night, mostly out of nostalgia, mostly because some part of me still loved that company even after they'd shut me out of it. What I found made me sit very still for a long time. There were payments, regular, almost rhythmic, going out to a numbered company registered in Alberta, a shell with no real business operations that I could find, no employees on record, nothing but a mailing address that turned out to be a UPS store in Edmonton. 200,000 here, 300,000 there, always categorized as design consulting fees. I cross-referenced the dates. Every single payment had been authorized by Larissa. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a tax structure I didn't understand. Maybe it was legitimate consulting work, routed through a holding company for liability reasons. People do that. So I dug further, the way I'd been trained to, the way that made me good at my job and insufferable at every other part of my life. I traced the numbered company back through provincial registry records to its sole director. It took me 3 nights and a worrying amount of coffee, but eventually a name surfaced that made my stomach drop. The numbered company was registered to Larissa's brother, a man who, as far as I could tell from his own LinkedIn, had no design background whatsoever and was currently between opportunities, which is a phrase that means exactly what you think it means. In total, over the past 18 months, just over $1.1 million had moved from my parents' company into an empty shell controlled by Larissa's family. I sat at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning with my hands actually shaking, not from anger yet, that came later, but from the specific sick feeling of watching something you love get hollowed out from the inside while everyone keeps smiling for the cameras. I almost didn't say anything. I want to be honest about that part. I thought about just closing the laptop and letting it be someone else's problem, because the last time I'd raised a concern about the business, 2 Christmases ago, when I'd gently pointed out that Larissa's marketing initiative budget had no measurable return, my mother had told me I was jealous. As if watching your family's life savings disappear into thin air was a personality flaw I needed to work on. But I am, before anything else, an auditor. I don't get to choose which numbers I notice. I spent the next 2 nights building a proper file, the way I would for any client, because some stubborn part of me needed it to be undeniable, needed it to be the kind of evidence that couldn't be waved away with a hurt look and a change of subject. I pulled bank statements, the registry filings, email metadata showing when the consulting agreements had been drafted and by whom, a timeline that lined up suspiciously well with the renovation of Larissa's lake house in Muskoka. By the second night, I had 41 pages. I printed them at a 24-hour copy shop near my apartment because I didn't trust my own printer not to jam at the worst possible moment, and I drove home with the folder on the passenger seat like it was something that might go off. The anniversary dinner was the following night. 30 years my parents had been married, and they'd rented out the private room at a steakhouse downtown, the kind of place with white tablecloths and a wine list nobody actually reads. I almost left the folder in the car. I sat in the parking garage for 11 minutes with the engine off, my hands on the wheel, trying to decide whether tonight was really the night, whether there was a kinder way to do this, a private conversation instead of a public reckoning. But I'd tried private. Private hadn't worked, not once, not with this family. Dinner started fine, the way it always did, my father raising a glass, my mother dabbing at her eyes, Caleb making a joke about how he'd married up, and everyone laughing a little too hard. Larissa sat across from me in a pale blue dress, her hand resting on Caleb's arm the way it always did, and at some point during the second course she looked at me and said, in that soft, concerned voice she used like a weapon, "Audrey, you've barely touched your plate. Everything all right with you?" I looked at my father. "Everything's all right with me," I said. "I'm not so sure it's all right with the company." The table went quiet in that particular way tables go quiet right before something breaks. My mother's smile didn't move, but her eyes did, flicking toward my father like she already knew, somewhere underneath, that this was coming. I reached into my bag and set the folder on the white tablecloth, right next to the breadbasket, and I slid it across to my father. "What is this?" he said, not opening it. "It's the consulting payments to Larissa's brother's numbered company," I said. $1.1 million, 18 months, no actual work product on file, I checked. I want to tell you the room exploded, but it didn't, not right away. What happened was quieter and somehow worse. My father opened the folder with the careful, controlled movements of a man trying not to let his hands shake in front of strangers at the next table. Larissa's face did something complicated, fear trying very hard to disguise itself as confusion. Caleb just stared at the folder like it might be a prop, like this was a misunderstanding he could laugh his way out of in a second. "This is a private family matter," my mother hissed at me, glancing at the other diners. "How could you bring this here, tonight of all nights?" "I tried to bring it to you privately 2 years ago," I said. "You told me I was jealous." My father was flipping through the pages now, his jaw tight, and I watched something shift behind his eyes, the particular horror of a man doing arithmetic he didn't want to do. "Larissa," he said quietly, not looking up. "What is this?" "I can explain," she said, and her voice had lost all of its careful warmth. "It's not what it looks like. The company does do legitimate work. My brother has experience. He's a personal trainer," I said. "I looked him up. There's no design experience, no contracting license, nothing. The only thing that company has ever produced, as far as I can tell, is your lake house renovation." That was the part that actually got my father. Not the money itself, somehow, but the specificity of it, the fact that he could picture exactly where it had gone. He closed the folder very slowly and set it down, and for a moment nobody said anything at all. The whole restaurant carrying on around us, waiters drifting past with trays, completely unaware that a family was quietly coming apart at table 11. "You should have brought this to me first," my father finally said to me, and for one stupid hopeful second I thought he meant it the way I wanted him to mean it. He didn't. Not here. Not like this. "You've humiliated this family in public." I laughed, and it surprised even me how little humor was actually in it. "I humiliated the family," I said. "Not the $1 million that went missing. Me, for mentioning it at the wrong table. My mother told me to leave." Those were her exact words. "I think you should leave," said quietly, like she was asking a waiter to clear a plate. And the worst part is, I don't think she even meant it as cruelty in that moment. I think she genuinely believed that removing me from the room would make the problem go away too. So I left. I picked up my coat. I left the folder on the table because they could keep that copy, and I drove home in a kind of numb quiet that didn't fully break until I was back in my apartment with the door locked, sitting on my kitchen floor for reasons I still can't fully explain, just sitting there with my back against the cabinets until almost 4 in the morning. I'd love to tell you that was the end of it, that the truth alone was enough. But families like mine don't work that way. The next morning, my mother called, not to apologize but to ask me to fix this quietly, to use my position at the firm to make the discrepancy disappear from the books before the year-end audit. When I told her I couldn't do that I wouldn't do that, she said something I will never forget as long as I live. She said, "We chose to trust Larissa because she makes this family look the way we always wanted to look. Is that so wrong?" I didn't answer her. I hung up and then I did the thing I'd been quietly building toward without fully admitting it to myself. The thing the 41-page folder had really been for all along. I called a colleague at the firm, a partner who specialized in forensic litigation, and I handed her everything, every bank statement, every registry filing, every line of evidence. 2 weeks later, the company's external auditors, the real ones, the ones who answer to the board and not to family dinners, opened a formal investigation. It turned out my $1.1 million was only the visible part. Larissa had been quietly siphoning funds for almost 3 years, nearly $2.4 million total, some of it routed through her brother, some through a cousin's event planning business that had organized exactly one event, her own wedding. The board, which included 2 outside investors my father had brought on 5 years earlier to fund the Alberta expansion, did not share my parents' instinct to keep things quiet. There were filings. There was a lawyer for Larissa, and then not long after, a separate lawyer for Caleb, because it turned out he'd known for at least 8 months and had said nothing. Abia signed off on invoices himself rather than confront his wife. The company that had taken my parents 26 years to build lost its 2 outside investors within a month, lost 3 of its largest commercial contracts when the news became impossible to keep contained, and by the time the dust settled, 8 of the 11 locations had closed. I didn't do any of that to hurt them. I want to be clear about that even now. I did it because somebody finally had to stop pretending the numbers said something other than what they said. But I won't lie and tell you there wasn't a small, quiet part of me. The part that had spent 30 years being told to sit up straighter and smile more and be more like Caleb, that felt something settle into place when I watched the truth finally outweigh the appearance of things. My parents didn't speak to me for almost 5 months. My mother finally called in February, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it, and asked if I would come to dinner, just the 2 of them this time. No anniversary, no audience. I almost said no. Then I thought about that voicemail, "Please tell me you didn't actually send it," and I realized I never wanted to be the kind of person who needed permission to tell the truth again. I went to dinner. My father didn't apologize, not really, not in so many words, but he asked me for the first time in my adult life what I thought the company should do next, how it could be rebuilt smaller, leaner, honest. My mother didn't apologize either, but she reached across the table at one point and held my hand for a moment longer than she needed to, and for my family, that was its own kind of confession. Larissa and Caleb divorced that spring. The last I heard, she'd moved back to Toronto, and the numbered company had been dissolved by court order, its remaining assets seized to pay restitution. Caleb works for a different company now, somewhere in Vancouver, and we don't really speak, not out of anger anymore, just distance, the kind that settles in after a family rearranges itself around the truth. I still work in forensic accounting. I still notice things other people miss, the column that doesn't quite add up, the consulting fee with no consulting attached. It used to feel like a curse, being the kind of person who can't stop seeing what's actually there. Now I think it might be the only thing in that family that was ever real.